Hello, Perfume Nation. Today I have a very special guest for you, and this is our very favorite self-taught perfumer on YouTube, Sam Macer. Hi, Sam.
Hello. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm interested. What makes me the favorite self-taught perfumer? I feel like there's a lot of great self-taught
I
perfumers out
think
there
it's
these days.
partially because you're the only one
I guess who
who
teaches
actually
perfumery?
who
There
actually
aren't
s-
many people around at the moment.
yeah, but exactly. So you not only like there are a lot of people who love perfumery. Some subset of them want to make their own perfumes. And I think an infinitely small subset of them are so dedicated that they will start their own YouTube channel, post educational content, and as of recently, we'll get to it later, make their own educational course. So, in that sense, you're
True,
the
true, true.
only and very favorite.
It's funny though, like because
So,
you say that, but I'm actually really surprised that I'm like the only. I mean, I'm not the only perfumery person on YouTube because there are other channels, a couple of other channels, but I mean, one of the biggest ones doesn't really post anymore, and then there's a couple of other people who post, some videos. But I'm quite surprised because if you go to most spaces, on YouTube, imagine like finance or gym or politics or other arts like learning guitar or even fragrance itself, right? Just there's so many YouTubers doing like fragrance reviews and things. I find it really surprising that there aren't really people doing perfumery. And as someone in that space, I think actually we need more people who do perfumery on YouTube because I always think at the moment if you're interested in perfumery, and I guess it is quite a niche topic, like it's some perfumery at home, right? So making perfumes is something that's only really been uh, I mean, I would say you've been able to do it maybe for the last 30 years or so, but realistically, it's been so small online, and it's actually only now that it's starting to, I think, get a little bit more popular from what I can see. I'm surprised that there aren't any other people popping up on YouTube really much doing that. So I hope to see some more sometime soon.
well, you get to be the grandfather, the OG of the kind
I
of
don't know. I don't know.
self-taught perfumers on social media. It
I don't
and
know.
and I'm kind of like I want to unpack this. I kind of want to unpack this a little bit. Why there are probably a multitude of reasons why perfume industry, while it's a $1 billion industry, it's only growing. Why did it remain so closed off to the public eye? Why is it so hard to actually find good information about what perfumes are made of, who makes them, what's the process, why are they do they smell like they do, why do we like some things and don't like others? Like, why do you think there's such a it's like anybody who starts looking for it, they will immediately fall into your channel very quickly within a few clicks? Why do you think there's such scarcity of information? It's a fairly well established technological and art form.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think there are a couple of main reasons. I think one of the reasons, like we said before, is perfumery is actually very niche and beyond as a hobby, but actually as a career path. There were some articles, like around a long time ago now, probably over 5 years ago. I remember specifically an article that went around that was saying there are less perfumers in the world than astronauts. It was something like in the region of hundreds, so not many as terms of the population of the whole world. I don't actually know if that number was true or not. But the point is, it doesn't really matter because the main point is, out of all the jobs, perfumery has always been like a very niche profession. Like there are just not many companies who do it. There are not many perfumers there. There are not. It's just a. If you think about how many perfumes are actually, if you ignore maybe 2010s and the 2000s, but going back at least the last century, if you imagine how many perfumes there are on the market, it's like in the number of thousands, right? Whereas if you look at the number of paintings on the market in art shops, it's like millions probably, I'm guessing. And then same with music, there's like millions of songs, right, that you can download. So I guess the scale of the whole industry is small, which means that not many people are in it, not many people are in that profession. So already there's a small body of people who could potentially share that information, I guess, if they wanted to. But then the other side of it is that those people usually don't have much interest in sharing that information. And I would assume that's because, so perfumery for, hundreds of years, let's talk about, it has been always like one of those kind of usually quite family things. It's like a craftsman type job that's passed down through generations. And it's one of those things where, um, a perfume formula is not really something you can copyright or protect very well. The only way you can really protect it is by keeping it a secret in the first place. If someone else gets the formula, you can't really stop them just making it up and then selling it, because they could just make the slightest tweak and then claim that it's something different technically, which it would be. So therefore, copyright and stuff is essentially useless. So the protection for perfumers has always essentially been keeping things secret. I imagine it like SpongeBob, where Mr. Krabs keeps like the secret Krabby Patty formula in the safe. So I feel like the perfume industry, as it's evolved from like artisans into big companies in the last century, even now those big companies obviously want to, their monopoly or their business interest is in having their information, their intellectual property to themselves. So there's no incentive really for them to share it. Now, I think you do every now and again get, someone maybe who's interested in it academically, who would go and write a book or something, or a paper or something, but then that's normally quite technical and then usually not that accessible to the public. You do occasionally get people who share bits, and then nowadays I think with the advent of the internet, there is a lot more sharing going on. But because it's like the start of sharing from knowledge that it wasn't readily accessible anyway, I feel like it hasn't just had very much time to really snowball yet and take off in the public domain. So I would say now is the best time ever for information on perfumery in the public, but it's just got a long way to go. It just hasn't really had a chance to really gain that much momentum yet, I think.
I full-heartedly agree. I think exciting times are upon us, even though it might become a bit of a snowball and overwhelming, because there's always exponential explosion of information and opportunities. But it is exciting time to be alive. I am
Yeah.
curious though, when you were starting yourself, how early did you realize that, first of all, that you were interested in smells? And then what was your path to where you're now as a self-taught perfumer who is now educating people on how to make
Mm.
perfumes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I always like smells, and a lot of perfumers, if you talk to them, you'll find that they do have some kind of affinity to smells even from a young age, but it's not like a prerequisite or anything. But I never, thought of that and thought, oh, I need to be a perfumer. I think for me, it was the fact that when I was back in high school, coming to the end of high school is kind of that point in your life where you're deciding what you want to do with your life, because you're kind of trying to work out what subjects do I need to study, when I have to make my choices for the next part of my education. So I was thinking about, what subjects am I going to take? What do I want to do? What job am I going to try to get? Like what qualifications do I need? All that stuff. So, and then, for me, I think I'd always wanted to be an artist. That was the thing that I wanted to do. Um, but the thing about that was so this is kind of, I mean, it's not necessarily true or anything, but I think there was a bit of a, what do you call it? Like a bit of a stereotype maybe when I was in school that, if you went and did art school or something, it's not guaranteed, but it's easy to come out of that with like a load of debt and not very much employability and that kind of thing. And on the other hand, I was really good at science in school, especially like chemistry, and all of that kind of stuff, like math, science. So it was kind of like a bit of a tricky one, because it was like, well, I've got an opportunity to go and study like all of this maths and science stuff, or I could go into art, but then I potentially close the door for those other things in the future. So I was kind of a bit stuck between the two. And then one day I remember reading a news article. It was about a perfumer, and he was just talking about his life, really. And he was, talking about how he would go around, travel to different countries, find the raw materials, and then compose the perfumes out of them. And I read it and I was just completely hooked. I thought, what, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, that's the most amazing job, you know, like you could travel the world and you can like make cool, like mix smells together, and that's basically, you know, like creating your own unique smells. And I thought that was really cool. And for me, that brought together that whole idea of pursuing like science and that kind of thing, and also being able to do art. So ever since I realized actually that perfumery existed, because like a lot of people, you don't actually think, most people don't even know that there is a thing called a perfumer. It's like funny because most people know what perfume is, but most people have never considered that there is a specific job to who makes, you know, person who makes that stuff, and that's just because it's such an uncommon job, that it's not very well known. Anyway, so when I found out that that was actually a thing, I thought, wow, that's so cool, and unique, and I thought, you know, I want to do that. So ever since then, really, I decided I was pretty set on it. I mean, I never changed my mind, so that's quite good, I guess, because I know a lot of people who never get, you know, they never get sure like what it is they want to do in life. But ever since I found out about that, I was just like, this is what I want to do, and I haven't changed my opinion, you know, and that was over like 10 years ago. So, or about 10 years ago, actually. So yeah, ever since then. So I went and did chemistry at university because I wanted to get a job in like a proper, like professional perfume company. And in the end, that didn't work out for me. So I finished university, and then COVID happened. So what I decided to do was start my own business and YouTube channel, and all of that stuff. And really, I've just been growing that over the past kind of for getting on for 5 years now. And at the beginning, I was pretty much doing that in my free time while working a full-time job. And now I've actually moved into doing that full-time. So as part of that, I've got my YouTube channel where I teach people how to make perfume. And originally that really started as me kind of documenting my journey of keeping, like documenting my journey of teaching myself perfume. And part of that was actually to keep myself accountable to it. Because, you know, like any art form, you have to do a lot of tedious practice as part of that. So, but now that's really grown into something which helps other people as well, which is really nice. And then on the side, I've got my various things in my business. So I've got my own perfume brand, which is kind of like my, you know, my passion part. I've also got a little supply store. So I've got, you know, help people with, you know, source some of their supplies for perfumery, like the bottles and things. And then most recently, I've also got the new course as well, which I've developed, which is not actually something I particularly, you know, had massively in my long-term plans, but I just had so many people asking me about it in my YouTube comments that I thought, oh, you know what, let's just do that. And so now that's kind of the main projects I've got going on at the moment as well. So yeah, it's cool.
There's so much exciting there. First of all, I just wanted to highlight in the previous Perfume Nation, one of the episodes, we were talking about how do you develop your nose? How do you just
Yeah.
understand what you're smelling better? And it is kind of a classical tradition in perfumery schools for people to train at least in two parallel tracks. First, understanding, noticing just natural smells, how everything smells, the doorknob, you know, like anything around you, not just
Yeah.
perfumes. And second, understanding and learning how to detect and distinguish raw materials. So you have your own supply store where anybody can pretty much embark on their journey, right? And get like to know what ambroxan actually smells like. Is that a possibility if people come to your store?
Yeah, I mean, so my store more focuses on like the equipment side of things, you know, like the bottles and
Okay.
stuff. I do sell a couple of raw materials, but there are a lot better stores out there at the moment than mine for that kind of thing. But there are loads of those now, which is great because, like I said, 20 years ago or so, there weren't many places at all you could buy that online. But these days, yeah, if you are someone at home who you're interested in fragrance, but you're actually more interested in getting to the raw material side of things, you can now pick up a load of these things online, not too expensively, which is really fantastic. And yeah, you're right. So in a professional perfumery education, you would be expected to both take a notice of smells that you find in day-to-day life and the raw materials. What you really do in your training is mostly actual actually a methodical study of the raw materials. So that's something, for example, in my course that I teach how to do in detail. But essentially, you learn the smells of the raw materials and various properties that they have, and how to use them, and which ones are the similarities between them, and the different kind of, let's say, olfactory territory is the term I like to use. So kind of the space which they occupy, like the category you can think of the smell, like which smells are earthy and woody and uh, you know aquatic, all that kind of thing. Um, but also things have different kind of places inside of perfumes. So there's you can go quite deep into learning your raw materials. But then, of course, you're right. The more you smell in real life as well, then you can kind of once you start learning your raw materials, you can start relating the smells you smell in real life to those raw materials, and it's actually a lot of the time you can start to notice. It's really interesting. Sometimes I'll smell something in real life and I'll think, oh, that's a particular molecule or a particular smell, and especially given that a lot of naturals, contain particular molecules that you might also learn on their own. For example, you'll get to know things like, for example, something like a lavender essential oil contains a lot of linalool and linalool acetate, that kind of thing. So there are certain molecules that on their own, you would know the smell of and how they would be used in a perfume, but then also which naturals contain those, and then that also helps you know how to use those naturals in a perfume as well. And then it also allows you to notice which ones are similar because they share certain parts. Yeah, and it's funny because now I'll be going around the shops, and you'll smell cleaning products or soap or whatever it is, and you'll notice a smell and you'll be like, oh, that's that raw material that they've gone and used in that perfume. Or sometimes even you'll be in nature and you'll smell, sometimes smells you might occasionally know the actual molecule. Like, for example, a famous example is citrihexanol, which is the smell of fresh cut grass. So that is a single molecule which really smells just like that fresh cut grass smell. So when you then go and smell that in real life, it's really interesting because you just connect that back to when you've got, when I've gone and studied my raw materials, I know that smell very well, because it's quite a core raw material. You use it in a lot of different things. And then it's just so kind of cool almost to be smelling things and instantly it's like, oh, it's that molecule or it's this thing or that. So yeah, and then obviously from a perfume's point of view, that's all very important because you're creating those neural connections inside your head. You're actually attaching those molecules or raw materials to situations in real life and maybe their emotional effects as well, and then that obviously helps you compose perfumes to specific themes or ideas, and it all comes together.
It is just fascinating to me that, and I think a lot of people don't realize it, that through the consistent practice of kind of training your nose and your brain, you taught yourself how to recognize specific molecules. How mind-blowing is that? That's that's like dog level
Yeah, I
sensitivity.
mean, well,
That
I
is
mean, it sounds cool when you put
incredible.
it like that, but it's not. I mean, it's really. I mean, it's not that crazy. I mean, it's like the raw material. A lot of these raw materials, these synthetic, or they're either called synthetics or aroma chemicals. Essentially, means the same thing most of the time. But those things are like just raw materials you'll buy, and then in a bottle, and then you'll go and learn the smells of them. So it's not like any rocket science or anything like that. But it is really cool, yeah.
Sounds pretty advanced to me. Like, I think anybody does you stop anybody on the street and tell, but like I can smell like, I don't know, 100 very specific molecules and
Well,
recognize
yeah,
them.
I mean, and I can't smell every molecule, right? So it's
That's
not
pretty
like
cool.
I'll go outside and then I can literally understand everything. I'm sure well, as a perfumer, the more raw materials you learn properly, obviously that usually means, well, it's not the only thing that makes you a better perfumer. That's part of becoming a better perfumer. And I've got about probably 400 or so raw materials. Some perfumers know about 2,000 or more raw materials. And I think they say in the big companies, some of them have access to potentially something along the lines of like 10,000 different raw materials. So there's a lot to learn if you have the resources and the desire to do so, which is cool because I love raw materials. That's one of the things about perfumery that's so, I don't know, like fun. Let's say is when you go and smell all of these smells on their own, it's just, I don't know, there's something about it. It's like every day, like imagine you discovered a new color. It's just cool.
Yeah, and also understanding what's behind the overall impression when something just
Yeah.
mesmerizes us in its complete and final form. You have like, if you learn how to understand perfumery, how to understand raw materials, to understand how the perfumes are made, you just have this like a third eye open, right? You have this extra X-ray vision into how
True.
this
But
how the pie is made.
true, it's true. But I mean, that's not always necessarily the best thing because it's one thing I do notice is it makes me more critical of perfumes because when you can smell all of the parts in them, I mean, you don't always smell all of the parts in them, right, for sure, but more often you smell more of the stuff that actually makes it up, and that breaks the illusion more often than not. But it also then gives you appreciation for some perfumes which seem just have been composed really, really well as well, which is nice. But yeah,
Do you have any particular perfumes that kind of the composition of which mesmerizes you, that you were
um,
particularly impressed by?
yeah. I mean, so obviously, I think so. It's always hard to separate like personal taste, like the objective from the subjective. So obviously, there's always going to be a bias in what perfumes everyone likes and stuff. But I mean, for example, like for me, like 1 Million by Baccarat Rouge is a really, I mean, like good perfume composition. I just think I mean, it's just comes together so nicely, and it's just so balanced. And there are a lot of perfumes, out there. I don't actually spend that much time smelling other perfumes. It's probably something I should do more. But it's quite funny because most people in the fragrance community are interested in perfumes first, and then potentially get into perfumery later because that's just so interested in perfumes. But for me, it was really, maybe it's a bit unusual, but like was just always interested in perfumery from the creative side to begin with. And I never actually had that much interest in the perfumes. So, I've become more interested in perfumes over time, but I'm not like a really big like fragrance head or something. I don't have a massive collection of perfumes. I've got like that little box up on my shelf with perfumes in, and that's about it. And that's that might sound like a lot, but a lot of those things are just. I mean, some of them are my own ones. Some of them are just things that people have ended up giving me or stuff. So um, yeah, I'm not the biggest perfume enthusiast. I probably should do more of that if I get more time and money to look at them. And that is a part of the skill of a perfumer as well. Is actually being able to break down other perfumes. I mean, obviously, a lot of perfumery is creative, and you want to come up with your own original compositions. But from a learning point of view, it's actually very useful to be able to break down other perfumes and study their formulas, which is something that we can do now with the advent of like GCMS, which is a scientific technique that came around kind of around the 60s. Was introduced into perfume labs, and that actually allows you to now essentially scan a perfume a little bit like an X-ray, and kind of with a bit of scientific knowledge, reconstruct a formula for most of what went in it most of the time. So this has been really useful as well. So
All
now
right.
perfumes aren't really so secret anymore. Like back, in the 1800s, if you wanted to get someone's secret formula, the only way you could do that is by manually kind of reconstructing the smell on your own, or breaking into their lab, I guess, and stealing the formula. But now, any big perfume company with a lab can pretty much go and put, as soon as their competitor comes out with a new product, they can put it in the machine, and their technical scientists will be able to come out pretty quickly with exactly most of it, like 95% plus what's in that formula. So that's something that's quite interesting actually for the industry as well. But yeah, as a student perfumer, and this is something I talk about in my course, there are ways to study other perfumes, and this is something that you can use to become a better perfumer yourself. Because if you think about, in painting, you can learn like oil painting, for example, from studying the masters of oil painting in the past, or in music, if you're learning the guitar, then often you would learn songs from like your favorite band or something else before you start composing your own. It doesn't mean you can't compose your own, but sometimes you might pick up certain little techniques, and the more you just expand your knowledge in all directions in perfumery, obviously that helps you become a better perfumer overall.
Very curious if we can apply your knowledge and skills to maybe try to pierce the veil, um, like to understand why certain perfumes become cult favorites. Like if we take Baccarat
Cult
Rouge,
favorite.
for example, there's so many
Mm.
like arrows thrown and broken trying to understand why did it become such a worldwide phenomenon. In especially if you think about the history of perfumery, the perfume varieties have exploded in the end of 20th century and then 21st century especially. So there's so many varieties that can be done now that for any given perfume to become such a hit, like people keep trying to guess why. Can you illuminate for us, like, is there some like new molecule there that nobody used before? Like, why, what is it about Baccarat Rouge? What is it made of? Like, what makes it so special?
Yeah, so Baccarat Rouge, I mean, yeah, that's super popular right now. Um, yeah, so I don't think there's a, let me think, is there a secret molecule inside of it? I don't think so. So Baccarat Rouge is actually one of the perfumes that I look at in my new course. It's one of the ones we study. And actually, the reason I chose it to study was because that's a perfume that when I smelled it for the first time, I thought, wow, that smells amazing. And I think a lot of other people have the same reaction, which is why it's become, I think, actually a modern classic. You say it's cult perfume, but I would actually say, I don't know, because I don't know that much about how popular each fragrance is. I would say we'll probably look back at Baccarat Rouge in like 30, 40 years, and that'll be like a defining perfume of the decade, in my opinion. Um, I don't know, but we'll see. I'm not an expert on that kind of thing. But yeah, I think, well, it's some really good questions there. So like you say about the structures of perfumes and how they evolve, and we can talk about that in a bit. But yeah, Baccarat Rouge, if you look at its structure, is kind of an evolution of, well, originally they had amber perfumes back in this is kind of around the late 1800s with the advent of a synthetic molecule called vanillin, which is probably one of the most widely used ever, most famous synthetic molecules. This is actually a fragrance and a flavor. So this is something you'll probably know at home if you've ever had like a synthetic vanilla, anything like vanilla ice cream, that kind of vanilla flavor. Usually they just use synthetic vanillin because real vanilla extract is really expensive. So when this molecule was discovered and they managed to start producing that really cheaply, vanillin is, it's way, way, way cheaper than real vanilla. So now most vanilla everywhere is just vanillin because it's basically that discovery made the vanilla smell or flavor accessible to the public. Before that, it would have been really only available to like, for the most expensive products. Um, I mean, you still do find real vanilla in things, but anyway, that's not the point. So when they discovered that, a lot of perfumers started using this vanillin and working out what kind of compositions go well with that. And the kind of one that most perfumers stuck to, or like the thing, let's say, that became popular, was something called an amber accord. And that's where you take a composition you make a perfect composition that's mostly based on vanillin, and it's usually it's kind of married up with labdanum, which is a kind of flower. It like releases a resin, and it is kind of what we call in perfumery a balsamic smell. So it's kind of a deep kind of resinous kind of smell. Labdanum has got leather facets, honey facets to it, and it's kind of a dark, like resiny, almost treacle-like kind of smell. So you put a bit of labdanum with some vanilla, and you get kind of the most basic form of what's called an amber accord. But then obviously, well, not obviously maybe, but perfumers then started fleshing that out into kind of a standard style of composition. So often other things like patchouli was very popular to go and add to that as well, and then little amounts of other things. So that was a perfume composition that was popular from kind of like, really around the start of the 1900s. But actually today, a lot of perfumes are still based on amber because it's just like one of those timeless, it's probably one of the most like popular or most widely, let's say, what do you call it when something's been kind of taken and then reinvented? It's one of those kind of compositions that's really canonical. Anyway, in kind of the 90s kind of time, we had like Angel by Mugler, that perfume, right? In the gourmand genre was kind of created around then. So this was kind of, that perfume was kind of taking concepts from the amber with like this sweet aspect, and often patchouli was used a lot with in an amber as well. It's not so core to it, but then with the Angel they introduced ethyl maltol, and this kind of like that with the some ethyl vanillin, I believe, is the rough record for that. Then that kind of created this. That was like a new trend of this whole like gourmand genre thing as well. And then if you look at Baccarat Rouge, so finally going back to what you actually asked about, that is similar. Again, it's like got a lot of ethyl. Well, it's not got that much, but it's got quite a ethyl maltol is a very strong raw material, and it's like a kind of toffee-like smell a little bit. Baccarat Rouge is basically based on four raw materials, and that is ethyl maltol, veramos, hedione, and ambroxan. So again, this is kind of like another evolution, or kind of like a, you know, it's hard to know obviously for each of these perfumes how much they're inspired by those ones before, but it's like that similar. Remember I said before, olfactory territory. It's those kind of very sweet smells. So anyway, that's kind of the history way to look at it. But Baccarat Rouge is really those four raw materials, and the thing about those four raw materials is they all have very good what we call performance in perfumery. Um, Wait, are you still there again? Because you just froze a bit on my screen. Oh no, I think you might be. Okay, well, I guess
I
it's
think
no. I
I'm
think you'll be
back.
all right. Okay, we'll just
Yeah,
keep going.
don't yeah
No,
yeah
I think
don't
you're
worry
okay
about it.
now.
Like if you're going on a monologue, I oh
Yeah. Okay. I'll
I'm
continue.
yeah okay yeah just
Okay.
don't worry about it next time. Just if you're on a monologue, keep going. Eventually, right, my feed will catch up.
Okay. I just wanted to check yourself that out because it frozen. But okay. 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 But anyway, those four raw materials. So ethyl maltol, like I said, was a toffee kind of smell, but it's got what we call sillage in perfumery, which is where it has a tendency to kind of leave a bit of a scent trail after itself. It projects a fair amount and it lasts a long time. And then we've got Evanil or Veramos, two different names for the same raw material. And this is actually the thing which is like the biggest component of oak moss, which is a very traditional raw material, which is kind of smells a bit mossy and earthy. But this molecule Evanil is like the clean kind of smelling. It's naturally found inside of it, but it smells a lot cleaner. But it still lasts a long time. It's a base note. Um, then we've got hedione, which is actually derived from molecules naturally found in jasmine, but it's very strong and diffusive. It's this kind of, most perfumes describe it as like a lovely kind of radiant, kind of sweet smell. It's actually got citrus facets to it as well, but it's a very popular, very famous molecule in perfumery. Like a lot of people have heard of that one. So that lasts quite a long time and it projects a good amount. And then finally, ambroxan again lasts a long time, projects a good amount. So these molecules basically have what we call volume. They project a lot and they last a long time, and also they're pretty universally liked as like nice smells. So essentially, what happened with Baccarat Rouge is the perfume was composed with these very specific molecules which perform really well. They project well on the most part and they last a long time. And that, well, it does a couple of things. So the fact that it's like that was quite popular because these days people often like their perfume to kind of smell the same the whole way out and be quite strong and powerful the whole time. Because with classic perfumes, you had it such that it was often kind of a top, mid, and base note sections were all kind of a bit more different. Not always, but especially certain perfumes, especially ones popular in the 50s. Some of these like Jean Carl's kind of inspired perfumes would have like different top, mid, and base, which is fine. Nothing's wrong with that. But then in the 90s, we had things like the Grosjean Accord and Trésor, and that kind of popularized this kind of linear composition, which is where you have like kind of perfume smelling quite constant throughout, but that really relies on having most of the perfume composed of these raw materials with the what we call volume. So, but basically, it just means they last a long time and they project quite well, right? So that enables you to have these perfumes like Baccarat Rouge. If you look at the formula, it is mostly composed of like 90% plus just those four raw materials, the ones I said. So the hedione, veramos, ethyl maltol, and ambroxan, and that is like essentially the perfume. Like if you make, so this is actually something I do in the course. If you look, so we've got an example formula in the course, and if you take just those four formula lines and you make that up separately as a perfume, and then you go and do a separate one where you just make everything else, which are these little decorators essentially they've added, you find that those four things pretty much smell like Baccarat Rouge. But quite interestingly, those last little trace components, while it still kind of smells, like Baccarat Rouge, it smells like the character of it without it. they do definitely add something to it. Without them, it kind of smells like something's just missing. But it's a very actual subtle smell. Like the actual, it's like it's kind of like having two shades of a color, which are very slightly different. But for some reason, one is just it's just that bit brighter. It's just a bit kind of deeper and more mesmerizing somehow. So that's kind of what those final little trace elements do in that case. But as to why that perfume particularly is so popular, I think it's just because it's made of raw materials that most people think smell nice. It is just a very unique composition. I think you know it's the beauty in that one is in the simplicity. It's just this very simple composition, but it's just balanced in a way that it just has this lovely smell. And it just hadn't been done before, and now it is what it is. It's very it is just a popular, let's say what we call an accord in perfumery, which is a certain particular kind of harmony of raw materials, and that particular harmony is just very popular, and it also happens to be composed out of those raw materials that perform very well. So most people are very happy with the performance because it projects and it lasts a long time. Now, it's interesting though because, well, this leads us onto other things. I mean, we can talk a bit about projection if you want to, a bit about, because you say people ask, can you make your perfumes like more projecting and stuff like that? Part of the reason that Baccarat Rouge
Oh yeah.
performs is because it's made out of those specific raw materials. But when you go and study raw materials in perfumery, you find it's actually quite unique for raw materials to behave like that. That's the exception rather than the norm. So again, this is something I look at in the course, but essentially, there's only a small subset of raw materials which are like that, which means that you can't expect every perfume to behave like Baccarat Rouge, because if it would need to be composed mostly out of those raw materials for it to do so, and there are only so many raw materials like that, which means there's much more of a limited range of potential compositions when you just stick to those. But it's not to say that there aren't others that could be discovered.
There's so much we can unpack there. So just to summarize the learnings about the phenomenon of Baccarat Rouge as just one case study of, and I agree with you, it's definitely a new classic. It's definitely going to shape the decade. A lot of kids are now growing up with that as their mommy's smell. So it's going to shape a lot of dating history for the new generation. It's like, oh, my mom used to smell like this. So, okay. So it's not necessarily that there was some kind of secret captive molecule that was used in Baccarat Rouge that made it special. It's
No, not at
actually a
all.
fairly simple formula with well-established and known ingredients in the perfume market, but somehow nobody quite put them together in those proportions, or
Yeah, pretty much. And that's the thing about perfumery, right? There's so many endless potential combinations, right? If you think about how many combinations there are, it's essentially limitless, because if you've got, like we said, we've got, a couple of thousand of raw materials, and think how many different ways you could have them with each other. I mean, it's just, pretty much infinite
yeah, the
the amount of
combinatorial
combinations you can
factor
make.
alone, yeah,
And then beyond
it
that,
explodes. Yeah.
most in perfumery, discovering your own unique compositions that work well is actually kind of difficult, because what you find when you start perfumery is that more blends smell bad than smell good, or not necessarily bad, but just like unremarkable and or not quite right, or just they just don't smell like you want them to smell. But having something that's an elegant kind of smelling blend that really makes you think, wow, that smells nice, that's really difficult. So because of that, especially, I'm just imagining here, but I would imagine a lot of perfumers in the industry who've got deadlines and things and stuff like that, and a lot of clients, they just need a perfume for their brand. I think there is a lot of, hey, there's a lot of compositions we know work well from the past that we can stick to these, we can make a variation of it. Perfume companies have big libraries of past compositions, and there's a lot of kind of classic genres like fougères and things which have just evolved and evolved over time. And oftentimes it's easier for a perfumer, especially on a smaller project without so much budget, or they're on a deadline, to go and do kind of a unique variant on an existing perfume structure, and then just add a few like notes to it, what the client wants, and then do that. Or for example, now you've got for Baccarat Rouge, you've got other brands who are like doing their clones. Some of them are literally clone brands. Others are kind of their own brand and they want to put their own twist on it, but they still are quite cloney, just less, overt. Again, if something does really well, it's a lot easier to copy it than it is to come up with that in the first place, because the amount of trials usually, unless you're very, very lucky, which occasionally happens, and obviously you do less trials the more skill you have in general, but still perfumery is a lot of
Hmm.
trial and error, and that's a lot of kind of mundane work to get through. So that's kind of what it is, it's just not always, it's not necessary to say it's not that easy, but I guess it is kind of not that easy to just find like really amazing new, completely new perfume structures, I would say.
On that note, I want to touch upon a very poignant discussion also happening in the larger kind of perfume lovers, perfume nation community, as I call it, is that there is a lot of confusion, genuine and sometimes very heated confusion when it comes to what makes perfume smell good. Because you said something that was actually, if you think about it, is quite surprising. The perfume ingredients, whether using essential oils or synthetics, or usually the mixture of both, they are designed to smell good, at least, I guess, in certain quantities. And yet you say when you just start throwing things together, more often
Mm.
than not, you're not going to get something that smells interesting or even pleasing. So, what is it about? So, there is this movement in making natural, or so to speak, perfumes that are mostly based on essential oils. And there's so much arguments between kind of like artificial divide, I see it, between people who like perfumes, commercially produced perfumes, and people who say like no, it's always going to be essential oils, and that's the only way to really make something that is deep, unique, that's driven by nature. Yet I don't know, I don't know about your history with how you started mixing things. I tried mixing a few essential oils and you just it always smells the same. You never can. You will never get Trésor or Baccarat Rouge or I don't
Yeah.
know, Fleur Narcotique from mixing essential oils. Can you like help me understand what why is it?
Yeah, so that's funny because that's when I started perfuming for the first time. That's exactly what I tried to do because why wouldn't you? Especially the information online back at the time wasn't very good. So yeah, I bought some essential oils, tried mixing together, thinking be able to make a nice perfume. Didn't work out. All smelled like herbal medicine, which was really demotivating. Actually, I stopped doing them perfumery for a while because I couldn't get anywhere with it. And I thought, well, I'm just going to have to get a job and then they'll teach me all the secrets, right? Um, the difference really for me was learning to use the synthetics, but it doesn't mean that you can only make nice smelling perfumes out of synthetics. There's a lot of things to discuss in that topic though. The main thing is like designer perfumes make heavy use of the fact that synthetic perfume raw materials are very, they have certain qualities. They are usually very clean, and the best way for me to describe the whole difference between natural and synthetics is, well, firstly, on one level, the reason people care about it a lot is like because of the safety aspect, and a lot of people think like natural equals good, synthetic equals bad, end of story, and then hence I want to use natural. That, and now there's a lot of nuance in that discussion as well because we don't have to discuss it here, but essentially, when you actually go and look deeper into it, it doesn't really look as if naturals are safer than synthetics. They're both kind of, everything has to be taken on a case by case basis. Like some naturals are very dangerous, and some synthetics are very dangerous. Usually, the bodies who govern safety and perfumery ban anything that's very dangerous or even looks like it could be a bit dangerous, regardless of whether it's natural or synthetic. For a perfumer, a classically trained perfumer, usually natural synthetic isn't like a big deal. They're just different raw materials, aka different colors in your palette. Um, Now, usually naturals have certain qualities, like often in terms of just from a perfume's point of view rather than a safety point of view, they're often a bit more can be quite complex, and that's often because they're composed of thousands of molecules, well, hundreds often of molecules by nature, naturally anyway. They're just big mixtures of molecules made by plants, but they can also make your perfume. They also have like they're less clean usually. They can make a perfume muddy in large quantities. That herbal medicine smell often becomes because there are a lot of natural molecules usually found in things like herbs and stuff, also naturally found in a lot of naturals anyway. And it's obviously they all differ because if you use herbal essential oils, then you're prone to that problem, which are the cheap ones that you can easily find online, which are the ones you would probably naturally start with. There are certain naturals, things like very expensive extracts from things like vanilla and rose, which don't have those kinds of notes. But then again, most people learning perfumery aren't using those all the time. They're very expensive, which also limits actually even in natural perfumes. Well, it depends on the brand, but perfumery is usually down to a budget. But anyway, another thing about natural and synthetics, if we ignore the whole like which is better or worse, the way I like to think about them is, like I said, if they're colours. So I've actually just happened to have like a colour swatch here. When you think of synthetics, right, you want to think of them as like these bright, kind of very clean colours, right? Like you can get something very specific. It's just a simple colour, and it's clean, and it kind of does one thing usually. But when you have naturals, I don't know if we've got like a good page. Naturals in perfumery, rather than like your bright oranges and reds, they're kind of like your dull greens and browns and things. Think about it like natural dyes, like when you're dyeing fabric. Plant dyes are usually browns and greys and dark greens, right? And back in like the ancient times when that was all they had, that would be the colors of everyone would be wearing like brown and dark green. Now with synthetic dyes, we have like bright purple, bright yellow, all of the colors you can get like these days are a lot of them are due to synthetic dyes, right? So from a perfume's point of view, it's very similar. Like a lot of these synthetics are like these clean, bright kind of smells that have very certain smells that we just could not get out of a natural, essentially. And some of those molecules do exist even in nature, but they're just not don't exist anywhere that they are found in enough abundance for us to extract. Just because something is synthetic doesn't mean it's not found in nature. It just means that we've made it out of chemical processes. But it's still, a lot of the time the synthetic molecules are still found in nature. They just haven't been made that way. So for example, linalool, which is found in plants, can also be produced in a lab synthetically. I guess at that point, if you don't want to use it because it's synthetic, it's just because you're worried about impurities that may have happened during the manufacturing process. And chemists generally are known for being able to purify things quite well because that's how all the pharma stuff is done, right? Like tablets people take for drugs. That is, chemists know how to purify stuff. So it usually becomes a question of, is that molecule actually safe or not on its own? And some molecules that are synthetic aren't, like they aren't even found in nature. But then there's testing that they do, and they always try to look at the safety. So anyway, there's a lot we could discuss about that. But in terms of the actual, I think you were originally asking is how nice the smells were. That's how I would kind of like to think of the difference. And because designer perfumes, they to get the smells, those kind of really just nice, let's say, call them smells that they've managed to come up with, they've done that by taking advantage of all of those bright colors, let's say, that are found in the palette of synthetics. It doesn't mean they don't use naturals. They do use a little bit often. But I would say the way to kind of conceptualize a designer perfume is usually it's about 90 to 100% synthetics and about 10 to 0% naturals. Depends obviously on the brand and on the specific composition. And one thing about perfumery is that naturals don't really, there's not like a percentage of naturals that should be good. It's just like depends on the composition. Like with mixing colors, it depends on the situation. Sometimes you'd want to use a load of naturals. Sometimes you want to use a load of synthetics. It depends what kind of smell you're trying to make, really.
To that point, one of the notes or accords of the year in 2024, according to me and Fragonard, is lilacs. Actually, Cartier just released. They rarely ever release anything in their high haute perfumery line, and they released a lilac this year. So lilacs are silent flowers. There's no classical extraction process that you can take the flowers and just get yourself some kind of oil or essence, right? So I guess if we are just confined to essential oils, and again, there's nothing quite not, this is just a chemical extraction process from the source. It's still a chemical extraction process, right? The rose oil does not smell exactly like the rose. But then we take it a step further. Lilacs are silent flowers. They do have a smell, but you can't have a lilac essential oil, correct? So how would you even go about creating a lilac scent?
Yeah, so you're right. Firstly, something like rose, it smells a bit different because when you the molecules you smell from a flower are the what we call the headspace around it. Um, that is the actual molecules that are evaporating off the top of the petals, right, into your nose. When you do an extraction, so that will be through there are various different ways in perfumery, but for example, distillation, where you put the petals in like a chamber and you put steam through them, and then that breaks down the cell walls. The molecules, the smell molecules, meld with that, and then it comes out the other side, and the oil separates off. That's how you get rose essential oil. So that, for example, some of the molecules like to go into the steam, others like to, they don't, which is why that the distribution of the molecules in the oil you collect at the end is slightly different from what was in the original flower. Also, some things can break down under the heat, and other things like that. So that's why a natural thing smells a bit different. But then, like something like lilacs that we can't extract at all, it means, for example, there's just usually not enough molecules in there with the smell, or it's just too delicate. It all breaks down in the extraction process or something like that. So it doesn't mean that we can't get the smell, it just means we can't get it by taking the natural extract, right? So the way perfumers do this is they take the individual molecules that they find inside of it and they try to reconstruct them. So actually, big fragrance companies, they'll do, as a perfumer, you will learn to use like a headspace analysis, which is they've got a cool kind of thing actually, which you can put on top of a plant and it will kind of detect the molecules coming out of it, and then they'll look like at the graph that comes out of what molecules they are, and then they can use that to aid their reconstruction, so it can help give them ideas on what synthetics or individual aroma chemicals they want to put in to their own accord. So what you're doing is you're constructing your own accord, which is where you take multiple raw materials and you essentially put them together to ideally make a smell that's more than some of its parts, so a bit like a chord in music. So in this case, the exercise, if you want to get a lilac smell, is to make a lilac accord. Now, this is like quite a large topic. So this is actually something I talk about in my online course, like how to make accords in general, and specifically like a deep dive into different floral accords. So it's like, then this is like a whole 1/3 of the course. So it's like, making accords is like one of the biggest, like, let's say, topics in perfumery. So it's hard for me to give you like a really quick summary, but essentially, there are different types of accords. So you could do something more realistic, trying to make it smell as accurate as possible, or you could do something more like abstract. So if you're trying to be very realistic, you would want to go really based on the real smell. So you do a lot of smelling of real lilacs, and then you look at the headspace analysis a lot, and you look at any other analysis you can get, and you start there. But a lot of perfumes, they're quite liberal in their marketing, right? They often say lilac or whatever, but the accords are just kind of like, kind of a classical floral lilac accord. And ever since the early days of perfume, well, modern perfumery, like in the, so let's say, not early 1900s, as synthetic molecules started to become available for the reconstruction of floral accords, floral perfumes were very popular. So you had these things called soliflores, which were like the perfumes that smelled of one flower, right? So back in the day, there was a lot of kind of, how do you make a lilac? How do you make a this or a that, right? And obviously at the time they couldn't do it always that accurately. So they did what they could with the raw materials they have, and ever since then, kind of classic, like let's say what perfumers know as the kind of accord for certain flowers, like a lilac, were kind of, they started their evolution from back then. So and some of those might now be called more of an abstract lilac accord because it doesn't necessarily actually smell like lilac, but a perfumer could also go and look at that and say, oh, that's a lilac kind of base because it's like the classical lilac composition. Now, lilac specifically is a funny one because when you go and look at floral accords, some of them there is like a lot of analysis these days, but even a while ago, well, let's say the composition of the flower is quite clear, and they have been and are able to make you're able to make accords which are fairly kind of accurate smelling or quite distinctive. But lilac's a funny one because it's not there isn't really like a characteristic molecule that's found in lilac, right?
Yeah, there's so much debate often, just lilacs aside, about the notes. You know, the marketing team comes up with a pyramid and people start nearly assassinating each other. This is lilacs. No, 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 this is lily of the valley. All right. And it's like they do share the same chemicals in common. So you are absolutely, if you smell lilacs, you are smelling lilacs. If you are smelling lily of the valley, you are smelling lily of the valley, because they do overlap.
Yeah, and the way they make a
So
lilac accord, specifically, classically, is I can't remember the exact proportions, but it's literally like it's just a bit of everything pretty much tipped in. It's like a bit of orange blossom, a bit of jasmine, a bit of rose, a bit of this, a bit of that. They just kind of take everything and they just put it all together. So it's very like non-distinctive. It's like essentially me like it's just it's very abstract. The way it kind of the classic lilac ended out as just it's just kind of a mess of other things. So because of that, as far as I'm aware, I mean there might be a more accurate lilac accord out there, you know, because I'm not an expert on each individual flower because there's so many. But yeah, I think classically lilac was a bit of a mess and non-distinctive, which means that there is so you could make 100 different lilac accords because you just make your mess of floral raw materials in a different way. And it depends all depends on how you want to market it. How many of them are actually accurate, I don't know, but like the thing is in fragrance marketing, which is funny, it's like it's quite accepted actually that a note as listed on the perfume doesn't necessarily always marry up one to one with the smell. I guess, which I don't know if that's a good
yeah,
thing or
I
a bad
think
thing or not really.
yeah, I think that's a whole another conversation we'll probably have to have sometime in the future. And I'll hope to get us a guest who can illuminate kind of fragrance evaluation, fragrance marketing, like how do we really end up with these pyramids, who comes up with them, and what do they really mean. But if we go back to kind of the perfume composition, which is the focus of our discussion today, all right, so the I'm trying to piece it together. So there are certain real life florals or experiences that are easy to reproduce and some that are much harder to reproduce. And apparently, lilacs are very elusive in that way and have many faces. And I'm sure in real life, there are probably hundreds of sorts of lilacs that grow in different places on earth. And they probably all have different smells, just like roses do, or different types of jasmine. Okay, we also talked about that longevity and projection, both longevity and projection, are now very much in vogue. They're very popular, but there is a limited number of molecules and therefore somewhat limited number of scents that you can produce that will have both of these characteristics. So what if I want a long lasting citrusy mint perfume? Those two are notoriously volatile, always somewhere in the top notes, and they're gone within 5 minutes. Is it in any way possible to make a perfume last longer if it has volatile notes that I prefer?
Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. I would say the answer is, to be honest, no. That is where people go wrong. They wish that would happen and it doesn't. There are things you can do to kind of nudge it a bit in the right direction, but you cannot take something like the true mint or let's say lemon essential oil like that because those smells are they're very rich smells, and you cannot just take those and make them last 8 hours. You can do various there's different like ways you can go around it. Like one thing is you can use say certain synthetic aroma chemicals if you can find one which kind of has a minty or a lemony smell that happens to last longer, and then you can kind of put them together so it kind of the lemon tails into this other thing that smells lemony, and then that ends up lasting longer, and it kind of gives the illusion that the lemon's lasting longer. But the reality is, if you do find something, it's never gonna smell as beautiful as the lemon oil on its own. So it's kind of like a compromise because it's not like you're really extending that actual specific lemon smell that you wanted to extend. Another thing is you can add a load of fixatives in, but fixatives is like something that's very like it's a big misconception about how they work. Like again, this is something I talk about in the course because a lot of people ask me about this on my channel. Like when they're, you can imagine people trying to make their own perfume. They're like, how do I make it last longer? Because it's a common beginner problem that your perfume doesn't last as long as you want it. Problem with
For
fixatives is
pedestrians like me,
yeah.
what is a fixative? Let's start from the
So a
beginning.
fixative is simply anything
Why
that
do you need?
it's anything that makes the other raw materials in your perfume last longer. Because if you think they're all molecules, certain, say, like big or long lasting molecules, ones that are less volatile, can actually pull some of the more volatile ones down with them. So it's just it's kind of they provide an interaction essentially that helps the other things last longer. The way I conceptualize them, or a good example would be imagine like imagine a gloopy like swamp or like quicksand. It's gonna pull everything else on top of it in with it, so it stops you escaping, right? Um, it's a bit like you can imagine. You can think
Oh,
of the
so they
bass notes as
slow
like a big
down
gloop,
the release?
kind of, yeah. So you can imagine they
Hmm.
bind onto the other stuff a bit, and they help pull it down on your skin just a bit longer, kind of thing. So slow down the release, slow down the evaporation, make it last a bit longer, right? If that makes
Okay, but
sense.
then would it in it's just a naive question, would it if I just put double fixative into a perfume, let's say I could do that, would it lower the volume? Because I want that nice voluminous projection of the citrusy minty smell. Would I still get it if I double the fixative?
So firstly, the actual amount that they increase the time by is not very long. Like it's just a little bit. So even if you'd imagine, it's not like you make your lemon go from lasting half an hour on your skin to like 8 hours. It's more like going from half an hour to like 40 minutes. You add a little bit longer. But the expense of that is you had to take a massive hit to the projection. So the actual volume side of volume is kind of like let's say a bit of a mixture of the projection and the longevity. But the way fixative work is they increase the longevity at the expense of the projection. So you think about it, there's only so many molecules there. So, you can either have them all release at once and then you've got like a big impact, we call it in perfumery. That's like when you have that immediate like puff of smell, like when you spray it on. Or you can have them released after a bit more time, but then that obviously they have to come from somewhere. So they come from the impact, which means the impact is suppressed down. So the initial hit is much less. It's much less like juicy and radiant and all that nice stuff that you want. So that's the problem with fixatives. Just to use something as a fixative. So the best way to the only real good way to like make your perfume last a long time is to actually have a long lasting smell that you like as part of your core composition in the first place. So like in the Baccarat Rouge example, a big part of the composition is these things that do last a long time, which is good. So your perfume, if you care about your perfume lasting a long time, i.e. you don't want it to just be the classic cologne style perfume, which is a classic type of composition which doesn't last very long at all. If you actually want it, if that's important to you that lasts a long time, then you have to compose with it in mind. You have to use things on their own that last a long time anyway. So the way to do it, in my opinion, if you want a long lasting mint and lemon perfume, usually the best thing to do is kind of let go a little bit of hoping that you really could get that smell to last a long time, but instead you find a very complementary base note that allows it to really shine at the start. And then there's a nice transition, and then you still quite like the smell of it afterwards. That realistically, I know it's a bit disappointing. Like I wish there was some magic answer, but that is kind of the best you can really do, and still have a really great perfume at the end of it.
Yeah, and I think there's like another kind of trail that people take in that quest. There is also some debate happening between what's the best medium for a scent. So there's, if you look for tips how to make your perfume last longer, a lot of people say, look, I'll use oil perfumery. To me, it sounds that what you said about fixatives and how they bind the molecules that produce the smell wouldn't oils have pretty much the same effect? So versus the alcohol that evaporates quickly. If you even if you could, right? Like it seems like not every aromatic molecule can be happily exist in oil base to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So the whole thing about that is a bit like, back in school when you learn about like hydrophobic and hydrophilic stuff in terms of chemistry or biology. Some molecules prefer to stay in water and some prefer to stay in oil or fats, right? And you know how water and oil separate if you put them together, that will make two layers. Everything else usually likes to be in one or the other more. So yeah, if you make your perfume out of oil, some things which are quite hydrophilic might not like it at all, right? So not all of your raw materials, firstly, will be eligible, let's say, for the oil composition. But let's say most of them are. Some of them will like to stay in that oil more than others, which means the rate of evaporation when you put stuff in oil is going to be a bit different than you expected. If you're using alcohol as your baseline, your normal, well, when you start putting everything in oil, everything's going to start evaporating at different rates than you expected, depending on how much they actually like the oil. If they like the oil, they want to stay there on your skin, even if they're quite volatile. Whereas if they don't like the oil, they would like to evaporate, even if they otherwise would have lasted a bit longer. So then there's an extra set of factors in addition to the kind of volatility. So yeah, you could do if you. So I don't do oil perfumery.
And
That's
again,
not like an area of
just so
expertise
we
I
can,
have. But
if we try to kind of summarize, so once you move into a different medium, like from alcohol or water-based perfume to an oil, which probably has its own benefits, but not all scents will be easy to translate into oil composition first. So some of the scents might not even, it would not be quite, you would have to rework essentially the perfume in order to place it in that medium.
you want to compose to your medium, whatever that may be. Um, in order
Okay,
to, you want to
second.
make sure that it performs how you want it to in the actual base that you're using, because otherwise it
Yeah.
won't perform the same anyway when you change the base. Yeah.
Yeah, and you say like in the medium will also change the way it evaporates, which I guess translated into like common sense, it means that the concentration of all of those molecules in the air as you're smelling it will change, which will change the smell. Even if the same formula could be exactly translated to oil, once it starts evaporating from that medium, it would be a different composition and the volume. Something will start smelling louder, something's
Yeah, and that's
okay.
because
Oh gosh, that is so sophisticated.
it's because what you smell in the air is at a certain point in time, is a given fixed point. And what you're doing by changing the composition as such is some of the bass notes might now become top notes, and some of the top notes might become more bass notes. So at any given point in time, the actual distribution of things in the air now is different to what you previously expected, right? So yeah, you're right. And then the interactions might be a bit different. The way it smells overall, because of that, might be a little bit different as well. So yeah, exactly what you're
Oh
saying.
my. And okay, and you started saying about Vaseline. So is that what is that supposed to do?
I mean, I don't really, it's not something I do. It's just that I've read of one of the tips that people give on like perfume channels. So if you want your perfume to last longer, as they say, like put Vaseline. So I mean, it probably would make your perfume last longer because it's like, it probably acts like a fixative. It kind of like traps your perfume onto it. But by doing that as a side effect, you're kind of, you're now changing the composition of the perfume because some things now want to, because they're going to want to stay in the Vaseline, and other things that want to go and evaporate off. So, I guess it's something you could experiment with if you wanted to, but it's not necessarily how the perfume's intended to be worn. But if for me, like this piece of advice, I don't know how common it is, but it's probably quite common. Like if you said you wanted to make your perfume last longer, the simple thing I would say is just spray it on your clothes because your skin's quite warm and that helps the perfume evaporate. You'll probably know from experience, if you ever spray your perfume on your coat, right, you smell it the next day, whereas you won't smell it on your skin. So, if you want perfume to last longer, that's what I say. Just spray it on your clothes. Honestly, works, I found, pretty well. And it makes sense because, it just makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And also for women, it's like a super minor tactic, but still, if you wear your hair up to spray it on your hair before you do, whatever. And then when you let it off, it just fills the space with you, because the perfume gets trapped in the hair much better than on the skin. And if you're going to let your hair down in the evening, let's say on a date or for dinner, it's just this mesmerizing experience. And I actually heard about it from guys, not from girls, because they would have these memories. So I was like, oh yeah. And then she came and she let her hair down, and it's just like I could smell her perfume. So that
That's cool. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that sounds cool.
interesting. So okay, so all these tips and tricks that are viral on the internet, it's, I guess, the conclusion is that some of it works and some of it doesn't, and they all have kind of negative side effects. You can trap the perfume with an oilier layer, but then you'll change the composition and really reduce the volume. Okay, what about, okay, if we go like down that rabbit hole to the very very end, looking for truth and the solutions. Okay, what if I take the stinkiest, the most loudest projection and longevity, Baccarat Rouge or Creed Aventus, and I apply 20 sprays? Because people do that, right? And then they are actually, in my subjective statistics, these are the people who are more likely to complain that they don't smell their own perfume, while usually everybody else around them is dying. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean
So
that
if I just apply more, will it be better?
I mean, yeah, so the reason for that is becoming nose blind yourself to the perfume, right? And that's something that in perfumery we call olfactory fatigue. And actually, part of the perfumery training, it's very important to avoid that. And that's when you become essentially nose blind, you become unable to smell something. Because if you keep smelling a constant smell, for like a minute, your nose just gets used to it, so it starts blocking it out. And it's exactly the same effect as, when you're cooking in your kitchen and you make a really nice dinner and it smells really nice, and then you can't smell it anymore, and then you're like, okay, keep cooking. And someone else comes in the room and they're like, wow, that smells amazing. And then you're thinking, I can't smell anything in here. It just doesn't smell like it smells normal. And that's because you have been doing the cooking, you've got used to the smell, you've got nose blindness, let's call it. So that is a thing. I mean, if you're wearing perfume, if you spray a load on yourself, that's gonna block it out in your olfactory receptors. They're gonna be like, yeah, we understand that smell, cool, let's cut it out. And then you'll be able to smell other things in your environment, which could be useful, in case there's something important to smell from an evolutionary perspective. But yeah, everyone else will still be able to smell it just fine. So yeah, you just because you can't smell it, the best way probably is to actually ask other people what they can smell. I would say.
Yeah, one of the things, like, because we aim to please, and when people ask, I kept thinking about it, because I used to have a hypersensitive nose, and some of the perfume compositions were just a big no-no, including Creed Aventus and Baccarat Rouge for me. After having COVID twice, now I can enjoy certain things in small quantities. That said, one of the things I think people don't realize, that just like you said, our sensing systems are designed to detect change. So instead of fighting that and increasing the overall volume, that your brain and your nose and all of your sensing systems will work arduously to reduce any constant signal to zero. That's literally what they're designed to do, so they can detect valuable changes. Instead of fighting that, we can try to use it to our advantage. And I think something that you mentioned about, sometimes it's really nice to enjoy the constancy of a linear smell. At the same time, especially if you enjoy some of those more volatile but beautiful, kind of heady, light compositions, it's worth embracing the dynamics. Like a well-designed perfume sometimes takes you on a journey through space and time. And similarly, embracing the concept of our noses aiming for change, we can apply, let's say, I prefer to apply perfumes on my hands, because then when I move them in space, that's what allows me to still smell my perfume, because it's not constant. Like if you apply it here, you're going to be done in 10 minutes. Like it's an attack on your nose. But if it moves, hair is a good candidate, right? Like any body extremities close if it's not like near your nose. I feel like we can definitely play with the senses and the compositions and all of the wonderful technology in the mediums and fixatives, as you said, in order to create lasting dynamic experiences. And there's always an option of just refresh. We're allowed to refresh our perfume, just so everybody knows. Um, I want to go back to that kind of hard case though. Okay, so we discussed like how far we can go with the longest lasting, the loudest perfumes. There's still some objective limitations even to that route. But I also have encountered a lot of comments and a lot of discussions online when people fall in love with a perfume in the store or on somebody else, and they just don't get the same experience when they buy the bottle. My suspicion is that it has something to do with the fact that, that delightful cloud, when you just sprayed it, that minty, lemony, or maybe maybe some peppery aspect to it. Why can't I reproduce it or feel it 2 hours later? Like, how do we fall in love with perfumes? Why is it one thing when you fall in love with it and quite another when you wear it all day?
Yeah, I think about the terms of the difference when you spray it in a shop and when you wear it all day is probably the natural evolution of a perfume, right? Because well, you got to remember that a perfume has its top notes, which are the notes which last the least amount of time, but they also project in the beginning the most. So these are the kind of basically in most perfumes there are certain notes which are the ones we talked about earlier, like lemon and mint or whatever, that actually pretty much the way they work is they jump out when you spray them and then they're gone. So yeah, the top, it's a funny one because when you spray a perfume in the shop, you're always like the top notes are what are jumping out and dominating the smell of the composition, but then it dries down into the heart of the composition and beyond into the base. But most people, when they spray in a shop, they kind of like do the whole judgment of the perfume at once, right? They spray it, they're like, that's what it smells like. Done. Okay, I like that smell. Now, obviously, you may just like the top notes, and that's quite easy, especially since top notes are not always, but often some of the nicest smelling notes in the perfume's palette. That's kind of like, it's not really fair to say that, but top notes often smell quite nice and they can be quite easy to use. So, just a very general thing. So it's very easy to fall in love with top notes. But yeah, the what really you ought to do if you're looking for a perfume for you is, something you want to live with all day long you need to kind of have that extra patience and delayed gratification and study it down into its mid notes and base notes and check you actually like those, because that's what you're actually going to be living with most of the time. And the top notes really are designed. It's a tricky one because the top notes are raw materials which perfumes want to use in their perfumes, and they're only really able to stay around at the start anyway. So they may as well at least employ their use for that use, because then at least they get to make the perfume smell nice with them. But nothing can really get around the fact that they're not going to last very long. So the way they work in a composition is to give you that nice smell when you spray it on, that nice little 5 minutes you get in the bathroom or whatever when when you're all to yourself. That's kind of like for you, the top notes. But the truth is, yeah, there's just not. It's just how they are. Like top notes don't last a long time, and then they flash off. So some perfumes which are more linear might stay the same a bit longer, whereas other perfumes with more, a more use, let's say the top notes actually really come through in the smell a lot more, then it's just unavoidable that unfortunately they're gonna come off. So yeah, it's good. It's best so if you're looking to buy a perfume, then I would say you really want to study it down to the mid notes and the base. It's just that's how the marketing people get you. You know, the marketers have always used the fact that top notes smell nice and they're the first thing to help them sell perfumes to people.
Yeah, in fashion industry, they call it hanger appeal, right? You just see it's like, oh, it's so good, but you don't know how it's gonna wear, how it's gonna fit. Will you sweat in it? Will you feel comfortable? Is it good with the movement? And I guess with perfumes, there's a little bit of that as well. I wonder if does it affect how perfumers compose? You kind of mentioned that. So if you want to sell the perfume, right? Like making all of those compositions, investing time in investigating and producing raw materials, you want your creation to sell. You want people to wear and enjoy it. You personally, do you take advantage of this kind of top notes hanger appeal when you create?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, for me, when I compose, I'm usually like a lot of perfumes going around. There's a core concept of a certain accord, a certain combination of smells. You think, wow, that is really cool, and that may end up being in the top, mid, or the base note. But it ends up as a I mean, as a perfumer, I don't think you should really try to just make perfumes that sell based on the top notes. I think what you really want is a good experience the whole way through, you know, from the top to base. I mean, at least that's what I try to do with my perfumes for my brand. I know clone companies, for example, often make sales on the fact that they can just make the top notes smell quite like the original, and then the base note, who cares after that point. But yeah, no, I mean, for the longest of times, I mean, professional perfumers have kind of noted the fact that, you know, if you go back to Jean Carles, who's a very famous perfumer, and he's quite influential, and he's quite he was quite impactful in the whole evolution of perfumery training and the educational system for perfumers. You know, his whole teaching method is about building from the base notes to the mid notes, and those are kind of that's the main part of the composition for him, at least. So again, this is something I talk about in the online course, like his technique for composing. But then for him, specifically Jean Carles, his like for him, the top notes are just kind of like the nice little bits you put on at the end. And he, you know, for him, he actually kind of says even that, you know what, like they're not really that important because they're gone very quickly. The real heart of the perfume, the real soul and character is in the base going through to the mid, you know, because that is really the composition you sit with. But even he acknowledges himself that, but, you know, most as much as he would love as a master perfumer for the customers to give it time and actually wait to appreciate those things, he kind of admits that he knows the reality is that's not what happens in the real world. People smell it, so it's still, you know, worth trying to make top notes smell nice for that perfume. Well, sorry, for that purpose. So yeah, I mean, I don't try particularly to focus on the top notes. Sometimes if you have a composition where the idea that you really liked is in the top notes, it can actually be more difficult because composing from top down to base, you'll find, is often more difficult than composing base to top. But you know, it depends on the concept you find. I mean, for me at least, it's all about finding that really cool little unique combination and making a perfume around that. So it depends, you know, where that lies. Is that in the middle, the base, or the top? And then go from there and yeah, try to compose it.
Just to close the loop, so what would you say if someone wanted to do it properly and to evaluate the perfume before they buy the full size bottle by testing it? How long should we give it to actually get to the
Ideally, you would go the whole way until the end of it, like, you know, all day kind of thing until it's
couple
gone.
of
I
hours?
would say. I mean, it depends. I mean, I guess it depends. Like, if you've got, if you know, if you're on a budget and you only want to buy one bottle of perfume, which I assume is like, you know, probably would be me and most other people. If you're going to buy a perfume, it's a big investment normally, unless you're like a perfume collector or you're like a millionaire. Then you know, then you want to make sure you get the right one. So I would say if you can just get a sample. I mean, maybe you would like narrow it down in the shop. Maybe you would kind of use the your initial reactions to kind of narrow it down from like 100 to like a few, like five. And then if you could get samples for those original ones, and each one I would wear on a separate day for like a full day, maybe even do that twice, and then you can smell it throughout the whole day and see how you live with it. That's what I would recommend because samples are usually way cheaper than the actual perfume, sometimes even free. So, I mean, yeah, that's
Oh
what I
my
would
God,
say.
or we could, there's so much more I would want to ask you, but I also want to just take a quick last look at your course because I think a lot of these things that you have discussed are structured and you share these insights and you go deeper in your course, correct?
That is very true. That is true. The course, yeah, I mean, so really the course is aimed at people who want to make their own perfumes from home. Like the whole point of it is to teach you how to make your own perfumes. So I'm not sure how many people who are listening to your podcast will actually be interested in making their own perfumes, but that is what it's about.
You'd be surprised. Now I am interested because the things that we discussed were not necessarily me making a lab in my own bedroom. Everything that we discussed today, you touch upon in your course, right? But anyone who wants to just appreciate and understand their experiences with perfumes or smells in general deeper, there's a lot of information there. Do you discuss like do you kind of explain the fame of any other perfumes in your course? Do you talk about Baccarat Rouge or anything else?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I guess it of course could be quite interesting. Maybe like yeah, I don't see why not. Like if you were really interested in perfumes and you wanted to get that like next level of deep dive from actually learning about perfumes to how they're actually made. I mean, the idea of the course is essentially it's inspired by professional teaching methods. Remember, like we said at the start of the whole thing, that the industry is very secretive. That said, I've kind of dug down into all of the kind of more obscure textbooks that I could find that actually give good information about how professional perfumers are trained, as opposed to just the kind of mixing stuff together in your bedroom kind of thing. So from that, it is really aimed at kind of its kind of frameworks, which I've kind of pieced together, which is, at least as far as I'm aware, is kind of hopefully the most professional inspired system from learning at home. So even if you don't follow along with that, you would learn a lot about how perfumers actually study, like what they do, what it is to be a perfumer, how they learn the raw materials. And actually I go over like pretty, I think it's about 400 raw materials in the course that I discuss. So even if you don't have them to smell, and you can always, if you really like the sound of them, you could always go and pick some up online, but you could actually listen in and hear what those raw materials actually smell like, see what the molecules actually look like. And I talk about that, and I talk about in detail. Remember, we were saying about the floral accords, like how they're constructed. Like, how does a perfumer go and take a smell like a lilac? How do you, if you wanted to go and put that together, make your own lilac smell, or any, like I cover a lot of different flowers and other things like fruits, for example. You cannot get an extract from a mango, uh, you know, because you just can't. Like the concentration of the molecules is so small that we can't extract them out. But obviously you have mango in perfume, so it's like, how do you make that smell? So I teach all of that kind of stuff, which is probably quite interesting. And then there is also a module on like history of perfumes through the ages. So that is I actually go through classic perfume compositions all the way from things like colognes to things like the ambers and more classic like fougères and chypres. But then to more modern stuff like Baccarat Rouge is actually one of the examples in the course, but then there's some other things like Aventus I cover as well. There's a perfume called Herod as well, a couple of other ones. I actually go and look into the formula, not the real formula, obviously, because I don't have it, but like an inspired by formula. So if you actually go make it up, which you can do at home by following these formulas, it smells very close, or kind of best approximation to the original. So it's kind of cool because you can actually go and, well, you can see what's the actual individual materials if you have them, smell them yourself, and then understand how that all comes together to create that final smell. So I think anyone interested, just in general in like anything from the creative process to the parts of how accords are built, what perfumers do, and even actually a bit of a glimpse into the formulas of like they're not the real formulas, like I say, but essentially like pretty accurate reconstructions of the of actual popular perfumes. I'm sure it could be interesting, I think, for some people.
Oh, absolutely. Consider me signed. So, last question about the course, which is very dear to my heart. This is the whole reason I started Perfume Nation, is that I find that sort of parasocial relationships between YouTube influencers or just generally perfume bloggers and influencers and the community and the people, sometimes it's better than nothing. Like social media definitely helped us to connect. Like us talking today. At the same time, I sense this craving that me and a lot of people out there have. We want to belong. We want to be part of a community. So does your course offer any kind of community aspects? Like, is it just like me alone watching webinars, or can I, like, through this passion, connect with other people who are like me?
Yeah, no, the community. So that's actually a good point. Like the community is a big part of the course as well. Yeah, so it's like kind of hosted on. It's kind of like a bit like a Facebook group, but it's not actually a Facebook group. It's like a platform that hosts the videos for the course, but it's like anyone can make posts. You know what I mean? And it's actually really cool because so I only launched the course like a month ago actually now. But we've already got like well over 100 people in the community, which is really cool, and everyone in the community is super lovely. It's like actually amazing because a lot of so like the community is essentially people interested in making their own perfumes, obviously, but it's really cool because like a lot of the communities online about like DIY perfume making I have seen in the past, it's like there's a lot of people coming on to ask like questions on like how can I come and make my clone brand or this or that, and then a lot of other people who like know it all and like shutting them down. And everyone in the community so far has been like absolutely lovely to one another, and it's like been a really nice place to be. Everyone's been helping it out each other, with sharing their own experiences on perfume making and things like that. So it's definitely like a really nice place to be. And yeah, the community is cool as well. Like, and a lot of people in the community are interested in like fragrances as well as the creation aspect. A lot of people are kind of somewhere in the middle of that. They're kind of interested in both kind of thing. So it's cool. It's a really nice place actually. People have been discussing a lot of things.
Oh my God, how exciting! Oh, I'm so glad you actually thought about it and you incorporated that aspect, because I think that's also what's missing in a lot of other alternative ways to learn about perfumery, being books, or even if you invest and get lucky and get accepted into perfumery school, which by itself is a very steep hill to climb. It's still not quite community building experience. And what you're describing seems to me like it's much more aligned with building a community of like-minded people and learning together.
You probably find as someone on YouTube that the community easily lives in your comment section, but it's never really like a full discussion in your comment section, right? Because it's kind of like it's not doesn't facilitate like full interaction. Whereas having community like that is great because like anyone can kind of, like people can get to know each other, and they can actually discuss things properly, and that's really nice because I feel like before the community was like it was like a one to many thing where it's like everyone watched my videos and knew me, but no one knew anything about everyone else, and I didn't know anything about the people watching either much. But then now it's like everyone's starting to like get to know each other a bit, which is really cool as well. So it is actually more like a feels like a more like a proper community rather than just kind of a more strange internet style relationship, which is nice for me as well actually because it's weird when a load of people know about when they know who you are, but you don't know like anything about them. I mean, it's like it's just how it is, but it's just like I guess a product of the modern age or something, right? So yeah, it's nice to have that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Like I have a little bit of that experience myself. Sometimes somebody leaves such a meaningful, deep comment, but just the way that the tag is arranged on YouTube is just not as conducive to a conversation. And then it's like, okay, I already feel like I have such a profoundly inspiring discussion with someone in this like one little thread. And yet all I know about that person is that they are birdcage 3894. Just, we're not in the same.
It's funny because like I get a notification normally when someone leaves a comment, but I don't get a notification if I reply and they reply again. So there's a load of people who I've replied to once, and then then they've said something else, but I never saw it because YouTube didn't actually tell me about it and stuff like that. So yeah, and I know what you mean. Like yeah, like when everyone's no one's got like a profile picture or some random username, and everything's so anon and everything like that as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess now that we're finishing our podcast, everyone, I'll leave a link below to Sam's course and the community you can join. Hopefully, we'll see you there. And if you have any questions for me,
I would say just check out the YouTube videos I have for free, because like I'm not expecting anyone watching this to like just come and suddenly like randomly buy my course or anything. But if you're interested in actually a bit more about like, you know, what goes into perfume making, how that stuff is done, then I've got like a whole channel full of like loads of free videos going back probably 4 years now, explaining all that stuff. So like come check it out if you're interested, you know, and I'll see you there.
absolutely, which I'm faithfully subscribed to. So yes, we'll see you in the comments here on the Sam's channel and in the community. Thank you so much, Sam, for devoting all your time like to the myth busting, explaining how things work. You guys, please let us know what you thought of our discussion on the Perfume Nation podcast. If you have any questions for me, Sam, or in general, me and Sam will be reading the comments. We'll think about how we can serve you if you're confused about anything, or if you have additional questions, if there's any follow-up podcast ideas that you have. We're so looking forward to hearing from you. All the links that you're looking for will be down in the description down below in this video, especially if you're watching on YouTube. On Spotify, they will also find links there. And Sam, do you want to say anything, like last words of encouragement? Anybody?
It was really cool to be on the podcast. And also, you have a really cool Bats hoodie as well. That's also another thing.
Yeah, that's it's my brand. It's called Ariel Goth. I designed these. Which link for that is also down in description. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Sam. Thank you all guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Hey there, you've reached the end, but don't just depart. Hit like, subscribe, it's a way to take part. Your support, your love, it's an art. Together we grow, play our part in this job. It's more than a clip, it's a bridge, a connection, a way to sustain, to fuel this direction. Each like, each sub, a show perfection. We're in this together, seeking perfection. Like and subscribe, be the vibe, keep us alive. In this digital sea, it's how we fly. Your support is the core, the drive. In this world of content, we're the prototype. Donations, contributions to keep the lights on. Fueling our passion from dusk till dawn. It's not just content, it's a bond that's drawn with